The morning my son came to collect what he believed was already his, he found a locksmith's card tucked under the windshield wiper of his truck in my driveway, a driveway that no longer belonged to me. What happened in the next 4 minutes? The shouting, the fist against my front door, the neighbors on Ridgewood Crescent who had known him since he was 9 years old, watching from their porches. I'll get to all of that. But to understand why a 4-year-old retired school principal from Calgary chose to walk away from his home, his city, and the life he had spent 4 decades building, I need to take you back 6 weeks to a Sunday dinner that changed everything. My name is James Kowalski. I grew up in Winnipeg, the son of Polish immigrants who came to Canada with $40 and a willingness to work for everything they ever had. My father drove a city bus for 31 years. My mother cleaned office buildings on the night shift until her knees gave out. They never complained. They never asked anyone for anything. That ethic lived in my bones. I moved to Calgary in my mid-20s, earned my education degree, taught grade 7 English for 11 years, and eventually became principal of Ridgemont Elementary, a school I ran for 19 years, before retiring at 62. My wife, Carol, taught kindergarten at a school across the city. We met at a teachers' conference in Banff and were married within a year. We raised our son, Tyler, in a brick 2-story on Ridgewood Crescent in the southwest, a house we bought when the neighborhood was still quiet and the mortgage felt impossible. We paid it off 11 years early. Carol died of a sudden cardiac event 22 months ago. She was 61 years old, in the middle of grading a stack of her students' drawings, when her heart simply stopped. She was gone before the ambulance arrived. I don't have the words for what that kind of loss does to a person. I don't think those words exist. Tyler took it hard. We all did. But grief is a strange thing. It either pulls people closer or reveals the distance that was always there. In the months after Carol died, I noticed things I had been too comfortable, too optimistic, or too busy to see clearly before. My son lived in a large new build in Airdrie with his wife, Amber. They had bought it 3 years earlier, a house with a triple garage and a theater room in the basement and a kitchen with appliances I would not know how to operate. Tyler worked in business development for a mid-sized oil and gas services company. Amber had a certificate in interior design and took occasional contract work, mostly for friends who needed help choosing paint colors. They drove matching black pickup trucks, newer models, the kind with heated everything, and a monthly payment that would have made my father quietly put his coffee down. I never asked about their finances. My son was 35 years old. It was not my place. On a Sunday in early October, Tyler called and asked if he and Amber could come by for dinner. Of course, I said. Come at 6. I made the roast chicken Carol used to make, with roasted potatoes and green beans from the farmer's market on McLeod Trail. I set the table properly. It felt good to have something to prepare for. They arrived 20 minutes late. Amber was carrying a bottle of wine I recognized as expensive. My son was in a button-down shirt on a Sunday evening, which should have told me something. We sat down, ate, talked about the usual things, the flames, the early snowfall, a cousin's wedding coming up in the spring. The wine was poured, the dishes were cleared. Then my son said, "Dad, there's actually something we've been wanting to talk to you about." I put down my tea. He explained it the way he had clearly rehearsed it. He and Amber had been building something over the past year, a real estate investment company. They had identified a gap in the Calgary market for what he called boutique property flipping, buying distressed properties, renovating them, and reselling at a premium. They had a partner named Derek who had experience in contracting. They had a business plan. They had a name, Cornerstone Property Group. They even had a website, which Amber pulled up on her phone and handed across the table to me. The website was clean, professional. It had stock photos of gleaming renovated kitchens and a logo that looked like it had cost money to design. What they needed, my son said, was capital. "How much?" I asked. $200,000, Dad. As a loan, not a gift. We'll pay you back with interest in 18 months once the first 2 properties have sold. I looked at my son across Carol's dining room table in the house where he had grown up, and I tried to remember the last time he had mentioned any of this. 6 months of building a company, and not one word during our Sunday phone calls. "We've been working on this for almost a year," Amber added. "We didn't want to say anything until we were sure it was ready." Ready for what? I thought. Ready for me. I told them what I had told myself I would say before they arrived. "Let me think about it. Give me a few days." My son's jaw tightened slightly. "Of course," he said. "Take your time." They left just before 9. Amber hugged me at the door. My son patted my shoulder in that way men do when they want to appear casual and cannot quite manage it. I stood at the window and watched the tail lights of his truck disappear down Ridgewood Crescent. Then I sat in Carol's chair by the fireplace, the one with the wide armrest she liked, because she could grade papers with a cup of tea balanced on the edge, and I sat there for a long time. $200,000. I had it. After 38 years of careful living, after Carol's life insurance, after selling the cottage we had owned on Pigeon Lake because I could not go there anymore without her, I had just over $380,000 in savings and registered retirement accounts. My son knew the approximate figure. We had discussed my finances when I updated my will the previous spring, at his suggestion. I did not sleep much that night. Instead, I got up at 2 in the morning, made myself tea, and opened my laptop. I started with the obvious things. The Cornerstone Property Group website, which existed but had no listings, no completed projects, no client testimonials, and a contact page that led to a generic form. The domain had been registered 4 months ago, not a year. The address listed was a postal box service in Airdrie. I looked up Derek, the contracting partner my son had mentioned, whose last name I had caught in passing, Hewlett. I found a Derek Hewlett in Calgary, with a history I could trace through court records that are publicly accessible in Alberta. A judgment against him from a residential renovation dispute in 2021, another from 2019. A business that had dissolved under ambiguous circumstances. Nothing criminal, but nothing reassuring either. Then I called my old friend Gordon, who had retired from the Calgary Real Estate Board after 25 years. I had known him since our kids played hockey together. I asked him, generally, whether boutique property flipping was viable in the current Calgary market. He laughed, not unkindly, but candidly. "The margins are tight," he said. "Distressed properties are harder to find than people think. Renovation costs have exploded, and most people who try it without deep industry experience and capital reserves do not survive their first project." He asked who was asking. I told him just a friend. He said, "Tell your friend to be careful." By 4 in the morning I had seen enough. I was not looking at a struggling business that needed a bridge loan. I was looking at a plan that had never been tested, a partner with a troubled history, and a website that had existed for less time than it would take the paint to dry on their first hypothetical renovation. $200,000 would not launch a company. It would cover what I strongly suspected was a significant pile of personal debt that my son had not mentioned once. My son called at noon the next day. "So, Dad, what are you thinking?" "I'm thinking I have some questions," I said. "Can you send me the actual business registration documents? The partnership agreement with Derek? Bank statements for Cornerstone showing operating activity over the past year?" Silence. "Dad, this isn't about paperwork. This is about trust. I'm your son, and because you're my son, I'm asking to see the documentation. Any bank would ask for the same thing. We don't have time for this kind of process. There are properties we need to move on this week. We need to know if you're in or you're out. In or out." Those words, delivered like I was being offered a seat at a table that was already pulling away from the dock. "I'm out, Tyler." "What?" "I'm not lending you $200,000. The response was not what I would have chosen for him. He told me I was being paranoid. He told me I was treating him like a stranger. He told me his mother would never have let this happen, that Carol believed in him, that she supported him, that she understood what it meant to back someone you loved when they needed it most. He used her name the way you would use a key, fits the lock. Something went still inside me. "Don't bring your mother into this," I said. "Not like that. I'm just saying she understood family. Your mother also balanced a household budget on 2 teachers' salaries and never once spent money she did not have. That was her understanding of family." He hung up. My daughter-in-law called an hour later. Her voice was different now, no more smooth presentation. She sounded genuinely rattled, or doing a good job of sounding that way. James, look, I know Tyler can be intense when he's stressed. He really believes in this. We both do. We've put everything into this. How much debt do you have, Amber? I asked. She hesitated. That's not really... It's a fair question when you're asking me for $200,000. She did not answer, which was its own kind of answer. That evening, I received a long text from my son. He said he had come to me first out of respect, that he had given me every opportunity, that I was choosing a retirement account over my only child's future, that when I was old and needed someone, he hoped I remembered this moment. I read it twice. Then I forwarded it to my lawyer, Patricia, a sharp and experienced woman I had worked with through Carol's estate, and I called her. Patricia, I said, I need to make some changes, and I need to move quickly. We met the next morning at 8 o'clock. Within 2 hours, my primary residence, the house on Ridgewood Crescent, which I had owned outright for 6 years, was transferred into an irrevocable trust. My retirement savings and non-registered accounts were moved to a new institution under different credentials. I updated my will. My son remained a potential beneficiary, but the inheritance was now conditional. 5 consecutive years of verifiable, tax-filed employment or self-employment, completion of certified financial counseling, and demonstrated solvency. Until those conditions were met, the majority of the estate would fund a scholarship. Carol and I had always talked about establishing bursaries for first-generation university students, the kind of students who reminded me of my own parents arriving in Canada with $40 and everything to prove. I also listed the house. My realtor, a calm and practical woman named Susan, told me the Southwest Calgary market was active, and she expected offers within 2 weeks. I told her I needed to close in 30 days. She raised an eyebrow. I'll see what I can do, she said. The following afternoon, my son and my daughter-in-law showed up at the house unannounced. I saw the truck pull into the driveway from the kitchen window. I set down my coffee and went to the front door. My son tried his key in the lock. The lock had been changed that morning. He knocked, then knocked harder. Dad, I know you're home. I can see your car. I opened the door. He looked at the new lock, then at me, and something moved across his face, not quite surprise, more like the recognition that something had shifted past the point where charm or pressure could reach it. What did you do? I made some decisions. Amber was standing slightly behind him, arms crossed against the October cold. My son's expression was doing the thing it used to do when he was 13 and had been caught in something that complicated mix of anger and calculation. The house is in a trust, I said. My finances have been restructured. I've spoken to my lawyer. Dad, he stopped. He ran a hand through his hair. You can't do this over a business loan. This isn't about the loan anymore, I said. This is about the fact that you used your mother's memory to pressure me, that you gave me a deadline instead of a conversation, and that you have been less than honest about your financial situation for a long time. That's not fair. Maybe not, but it's true. My daughter-in-law stepped forward. James, we're not trying to take advantage of you. We made some mistakes, and we needed help. That's all this is. I understand that, I said. But the help you need is not $200,000 from me. The help you need is a financial counselor, a real accountant, and a hard conversation about what you can actually afford to live. My son stepped forward slightly, his voice dropping to something I recognized from parent-teacher meetings, that tone adults use when they want to sound calm and reasonable, but mean neither. What happens to the house? It's listed. You're selling Mom's house. I'm selling my house, I said. Carol wanted me to live. She told me that many times near the end. She did not mean live here, in this particular set of rooms. She meant actually live. I have been doing neither for 2 years. My son stared at me. Where are you going? I'll let you know when I arrive. He stood on the porch for another full minute. I could hear him breathing. Then I heard his truck start and pull away, and the street went quiet, and I went back to my kitchen and drank my cold coffee and looked out at the backyard where Carol's garden had been untouched since she died, because I could not bear to change it and could not bear to look at it either. Maybe someone else would tend it now. Maybe a young family would move in and a child would pull the first carrot of the summer, not knowing who had planted that row. I decided that was all right. The house sold in 9 days. A couple relocating from Ontario offered $11,000 over asking and needed possession in 3 weeks. I said yes before Susan had finished the sentence. I spent 2 days donating and selling most of what I owned. Carol's clothes had gone to the women's shelter on Elbow Drive the previous spring. Her books I kept. Her garden tools I gave to our neighbor Helen, who had admired Carol's roses every summer for 16 years and cried when I handed her the basket. I kept my own books, my fly rod, the travel chess set Carol had given me on our 20th anniversary, and a small watercolor she had painted of the Bow River that used to hang in our bedroom. Everything else could go. I had been looking at a map in the evenings for 2 weeks and kept coming back to the same place, Canmore. I had been there dozens of times over the years, close enough to know it, far enough to be different. A town tucked between mountains that made the rest of life feel appropriately small. A place where people walked and skied and sat by the river and did not ask too much of each other. I found a small rental through a property manager, a 2-bedroom ground floor unit in a converted older home near the creek, with a garage where I could set up a work table. The owner, a retired hydrologist named Frank, who had built the house decades ago and moved to Victoria when his wife's health required a milder climate, asked me over the phone why I was moving to Canmore. I told him the true version. I am 64 years old. I just sold my family home, and I need to find out what comes next. He was quiet for a moment. Good reason, he said. The mountains help with that. I drove out on a Wednesday in late November. It snowed lightly over the Bow Valley as I came through the gap. The mountains rose on both sides, white at the top, dark granite below, and I felt something loosen in my chest that I had not realized had been clenched. The first week I unpacked, explored the town, and introduced myself to approximately no one, which suited me perfectly. I set up a fly-tying station in the garage because the Bow River does not stop for winter, not entirely, and I had always meant to take it more seriously. I walked the trail along the creek every morning with coffee and a thermos. I ate simply. I slept better than I had in 2 years. My son did not call. His old friend Graham, someone I had met perhaps twice at Christmas gatherings, sent me a message on Facebook saying he thought what I had done was cold and that families should stick together regardless. I thanked him for sharing his opinion and did not respond further. My younger brother Dennis called from Halifax, where he had retired after 30 years with the Coast Guard. We talked every few weeks but had not had a real conversation since Carol's funeral. "Jimmy," he said. "Tyler called me. He says you've gone off the deep end." I told Dennis everything. The dinner, the demand, the investigation, the overnight research, the restructuring, the sale, Canmore. My brother was quiet for a while on the other end, which was unusual for him. He had our father's gift for filling silence with words. When he finally spoke, he said, "You know what Mama would have said. She would have told me to trust my gut," I said. "She would have told you to trust your gut and then said a decade of the rosary just to cover the bases." I laughed. It was the first time I had laughed out loud since arriving in Canmore, and it surprised me with its warmth. Dennis said, "You did right, Jimmy. I know it doesn't feel that way, but you did right." "I don't know if I did right," I said. "I know I stopped doing wrong, which isn't the same thing. I should have had this conversation with my son years ago. Carol and I both should have. We made it too comfortable for too long." "She was a wonderful woman," Dennis said, "but she would have given that boy the shirt off her back and asked if he needed the sweater too." I know. Sometimes love is better from a distance. I thought about that for a long time after we hung up. I found a fly fishing club that met informally on Tuesday mornings at a cafe on Main Street. 8 or 9. Retired men who gathered to drink coffee, complain about conditions on the bow, and lie enthusiastically about the size of fish they had released. I started going. The men were from everywhere. A former civil engineer from Edmonton, a doctor who had left practice at 60 to paint landscapes, a Czech immigrant who had owned a restaurant in Banff for 20 years and closed it when his children moved away. They asked few questions. They poured coffee. After 4 Tuesdays, the engineer, a sardonic man named Walt, told me I had been officially adopted into the group. I did not know that was on offer, I said. It wasn't, said Walt. You don't get a say. I also volunteered at the public library on Thursday afternoons, helping with a digital literacy program for seniors, teaching people in their 70s and 80s how to use smartphones, how to recognize an email scam, how to video call their grandchildren in Vancouver or Halifax or somewhere farther. One woman, a former nurse in her early 80s named Elspeth, had never sent a text message in her life. On her third session, she texted her daughter and then looked at me with an expression I recognized from 30 years in schools, the particular pride of someone who has just discovered they are more capable than they believed. That look never got old. In early February, Patricia called. My son had been in contact with her office, attempting to obtain information about the trust structure. She had declined to disclose anything, as I had instructed. He had been persistent. She had been patient and unmovable in the way that only a lawyer of her experience can be. He also asked whether there were grounds to challenge the estate planning on the basis of diminished capacity, she said. I waited. I advised him, she continued, that I had arranged for a comprehensive cognitive assessment at the time we restructured the estate, conducted by a registered neuropsychologist, that the documentation is thorough and current, that I passed without any areas of concern, and that if he wished to pursue a legal challenge, he was of course entitled to do so, and she would be delighted to represent me in the proceedings. He didn't say anything after that. He said several things, she replied evenly. None of them are worth repeating. One more piece of information, she added. His wife has retained her own counsel. There has been a separation. The filing was 3 weeks ago. I sat with that. Any children? I asked. No children. The Airdrie property is jointly mortgaged and the disposition is unresolved. There is, by all indications, significant consumer debt on both sides. After I hung up, I put on my coat and walked down to the creek. The temperature was -14, clear and absolutely still. The kind of cold that Alberta makes look like art. The water moved below the ice shelves at the edges, dark and purposeful. A pair of dippers, small, improbable birds that live around moving water even in the depth of winter, were working the current. Diving and surfacing, utterly indifferent to the cold. I stood and watched them until my fingers went numb. I thought about my daughter-in-law, who had sat across my dining room table with a bottle of expensive wine and carefully rehearsed confidence, and whether there was a version of her that had also been misled, also caught inside a story that turned out not to be true. I hoped she would find her footing. I hoped they both would. March came. The light changed over the mountains in the way that only people who have spent winters in the Rockies truly understand, not suddenly warm, but suddenly lit, like someone had slowly turned up a dial on everything. I started tying flies for the spring season. I painted 2 watercolors that were not good but were honestly mine. Walt from the fishing group invited me to a poker night at his house, and I lost $32, which felt like exactly the right amount. In late March, my son texted, 4 words, "Dad, can we talk?" I did not answer that night. Patricia had advised me to be patient. He might genuinely want to reconcile, or he might simply be reorganizing for another approach. I had learned to notice the difference between words that are offered and words that are positioned, but I was not certain I could read my own son's intentions clearly yet. I had too much history with wanting to believe the better version of him. 3 days later, I replied, "Yes, call me Sunday at 2. He called at exactly 2 o'clock. My son had never been punctual in his life. That alone told me something. He did not begin with the money. That told me something more. "Dad," he said, "I'm not going to pretend I have a speech ready or that I've got it all figured out. I wanted to say I'm sorry for how I handled things, for what I said about Mom. I knew it was wrong when I said it. I said it anyway because I was scared and I wanted to make you do what I wanted. That was wrong." I waited. He kept going. The business cornerstone, it never really existed. I mean, the idea existed, but we had no clients. Derek had a truck and a story and a great deal of confidence. The website was Amber's sister's boyfriend, who does graphic design on the side. The contracts I alluded to, I made them up. I told Amber they were real, and she believed me. And that's That's part of why she left. She found out I had been lying to her the same way I was lying to you, and she had had enough. How much debt do you have? I asked. He told me. The number was larger than I had expected, and I had expected something bad. Between the line of credit on the house, the personal loans, the credit cards, and the lease buyouts on both trucks, my son was carrying just under $230,000 in consumer debt, not counting the mortgage on a house, now caught in a separation proceeding. My $200,000 would not have saved a business. There was no business. It would have purchased them perhaps 8 months of their existing lifestyle before the same wall. Where are you now? I asked. Renting a room in a house in Chestermere. 2 other guys, both about 28. He let out a breath that was almost a laugh. It's fine, Dad. It's honestly fine. I go to work. I come home. I cook my own food. Where are you working? Dispatch coordinator at a trucking company. Shift work, pays the bills. He paused. I applied for 12 jobs before that one. It was the first that called back. I let that sit. I'm in counseling, he continued. Financial counseling and regular therapy. My therapist says I built my whole identity around appearing successful. And when the appearance started crumbling, I just kept lying to hold it together because I did not know how to be the person who had failed. She says a lot of things. Most of them are uncomfortable and probably true. Your grandfather, I said, drove a bus for 31 years. Your grandmother cleaned offices at night. They never once pretended to be something they were not. They were proud of what they actually had. I know, Dad. I know. What do you need from me, Tyler? Nothing. I'm not calling to ask for anything. I'm calling because my therapist said I needed to make amends, and because I actually wanted to. I know you probably can't tell the difference yet, but I did want to. I'm glad you called. He was quiet. Then, Dad, can I ask where you're living now? I know you left Calgary. Canmore. Yeah? Since November. He made a sound I could not quite place. Is it good? It's very good. A pause. I'm glad. I'm really glad. We talked for another 40 minutes. He told me about a hiking trail he had done once outside Canmore years ago, in university, and how he remembered standing at the top, looking at the mountains, and feeling like anything was possible. I told him anything still was, at 35, despite the evidence he was currently living with. He asked about the fishing club, about the rental, about whether I had made friends. I told him about Walt and about the dippers on the creek in February. These small birds diving into freezing water without hesitation, over and over, because that was simply what they did. He laughed a real laugh, the one I remembered from when he was a boy, loose and unguarded. The laugh Carol used to say was the best sound in any room. Before we hung up, he said, Dad, I know you changed your will. I'm not asking about it. I just want you to know I understand why, and I'm not going to do anything about it. Whatever you decide to do with what you've worked for your whole life is your decision to make. I appreciate you saying that. I mean it. I know you do, I said. April came and the river opened and Walt and 2 others from the Tuesday group drove up the Bow Valley Parkway before sunrise on the first morning of the season. We stood in cold water in chest waders and caught nothing until nearly 9 o'clock, when Walt hooked a brown trout he would describe, with escalating dimensions, for the next 14 months. I caught one small cutthroat that I released carefully, watched it hold still in the current for a moment as if deciding something, and then watched it dart into the shadow of a boulder and disappear. Something about that felt worth keeping. I called Dennis from the riverbank, still in my waders. He picked up on the second ring. You fish in Canmore? He said. On the Bow River, before sunrise, with 4 old men who lie about everything and make excellent coffee. Jimmy, he said, I think you're going to be all right. I think so too, I said. In late May, my son texted asking if he could visit sometime, when I was ready, when it made sense. Not a demand, just a question left open, the way questions between people who are learning to trust each other again tend to be. I waited a week before answering, not because I was unsure, but because I wanted to give the answer the weight it deserved. Come in July, I wrote back. I'll take you to the river. He arrived on a Friday afternoon with a backpack, a pair of second-hand hiking boots from Mech, and nothing else. No branded anything. He looked like someone who had recently rediscovered the version of himself that existed before he had started performing a different one. I made dinner. We ate on the small patio behind the rental, looking up at the mountain above the town, the one with the long, elegant ridge that catches the last light of every evening and holds it longer than seems physically reasonable. We talked easily, without agenda, the way we used to when he was young, before the distance had grown so quietly between us that neither of us had noticed it becoming a habit. Saturday morning, I took him to the river. He had never fly fished. I had never taught anyone. We spent 2 hours on the bank before a line ever touched the water, learning the cast, learning the drift, learning to read what the river was doing and respond to it rather than fight it. He was impatient at first, the way he had always been impatient, wanting the result before the process. But the river does not accommodate impatience. It simply keeps moving, indifferent and instructive in equal measure. By mid-afternoon, he had the motion of it. Not well, not yet, but genuinely. He was watching the water the way you have to watch it when you begin to understand it, as if the surface were a language he was just starting to read. He did not catch anything. He did not need to. On Sunday morning, before his bus back to Calgary, he put an envelope on the kitchen table while I was making eggs. "What's this?" I asked. "Open it." Inside was $250 in cash, 10s and 20s. The kind of money that comes from a shift worker's wallet carefully set aside over weeks. "Tyler," I said. "It's not repayment," he said quickly. "I know it's not even close to repayment. It's just my therapist says part of breaking the pattern is changing the direction, learning to give instead of always taking. So this is that. This is me trying to give something real that I actually earned." I looked at my son, standing in my small kitchen in his second-hand boots, and I saw the boy Carol and I had raised before we had failed him with all the cushioning, before we had loved him so completely and so carelessly that we had never let him discover that love and accountability were not opposites. They were the same thing seen from different angles. "I'm proud of you," I said. He looked at the floor. "I'm trying to be worth that. You already are." He took the bus at noon. I watched it pull out of the terminal and head east down the highway toward Calgary, and then I walked back along the creek in the June warmth with the mountains on all sides, thinking about my father driving his bus, my mother cleaning her offices, the $40 they had arrived with, and what they had built from it. Not wealth. Exactly, but something more durable than wealth. A model, a demonstration of what it meant to earn your life rather than demand it from someone who loved you. I deposited my son's envelope at the bank that afternoon and transferred a matching $250 to the scholarship fund in Carol's name. The first bursary had been awarded 2 months earlier to a first-generation student from Red Deer studying environmental science. She had sent a letter, formal, careful, clearly written with effort, that said, "Thank you. I did not expect this kind of help. I will not waste it." I framed it. I hung it beside Carol's watercolor of the Bow River on the wall of my study, and I thought Carol would have read that letter twice, and then called her sister in Edmonton to read it out loud to her. The following September, my son visited again. 8 months into his dispatch job, recently offered a team lead position he had accepted. He had filed his taxes on time for the first time in 4 years. He was working through a debt repayment plan with a licensed insolvency trustee, slow, unglamorous, and real. He laid the spreadsheet on the kitchen table over dinner without being asked. The way you do when accountability has stopped feeling like exposure and started feeling like just another ordinary fact about your life. He asked about Carol a great deal that trip. Not the way he used to, not to invoke her, not to use her as leverage. He asked about her the way you ask about someone you are beginning to genuinely miss rather than strategically reference. He asked what she had been like as a teacher, whether she had ever told me about the children she worried about, the families she tried to quietly support, the students who broke her heart a little each June because she knew some of them were leaving the safest room they would have all year. She told me everything, I said. He was quiet for a moment. "I think I took her for granted," he said. "I think I took you both for granted because you made it look easy." "It was not easy," I said. "We just did not complain in front of you. That was probably a mistake, in hindsight." "Probably," he said, But I understand it better now. Chestermere teaches you things. Does it? He smiled. Mostly about how loud other people's televisions can be at midnight. But other things too. On his last morning, we took a walk by the river before his bus. The aspen leaves were turning gold against the gray mountain faces. The kind of October color that feels excessive in the best possible way. A young family walked ahead of us on the trail. 2 parents and a small child who kept stopping to pick up rocks from the path, holding each one up for inspection. The parents received each rock with the same gravity, as if it might be the most important rock yet. My son watched them without saying anything for a while. Then he said, "Dad, I'm going to be okay." "I know you are," I said. "I mean really okay, not performing okay. Actually okay." "I know the difference," I said. "And I know now that you do too." He nodded. We walked the rest of the way to the bus stop in the kind of easy silence you can only have with someone you have known your whole life, once you have finally stopped pretending with each other. I waved when the bus pulled out. He waved back. I stood there until it was small, and then gone. And then I turned and walked home along the creek, under the aspens, under the mountains, in the good cold air of a Canmore October. Not every story closes cleanly. Not every wound heals without a scar. But this particular ordinary story, a father and a son, and the hard, necessary road between a mistake and an understanding, this one was finally telling the truth. Carol used to say that the most important thing she had learned in 30 years of teaching kindergarten was that children do not need you to protect them from every difficulty. They need you to believe they can get through it themselves. She said the hardest part of teaching was never the struggling students. It was resisting the urge to make things too easy for the ones you loved the most. I think she was right. I think she was right about most things. And I think she would have made a reservation at the small Italian place on Main Street, ordered the good pasta, and raised her glass to what comes after the hard part, not to celebrate that it happened, but simply to acknowledge that we were still here and that it had been worth it. I did that myself, on a Thursday evening in late October, at a corner table by the window with a view of the mountain-lit gold in the last light of the day. I ordered the good pasta. I raised my glass. It was enough. It was more than enough.